Shalom Chavrim, I'm Steve Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live, and today we have a very special guest here with us, and I think my wife would be the best one to introduce this guest. So if you would, Yana.
Yes, we have Miko Peled with us today, who is an Israeli-American activist. He's an author and a karate instructor. Miko, you're a karate instructor. That's awesome.
I was.
You was. You don't practice anymore?
No, I retired.
You retired. Okay, very nice. Well, you're an author of a book, The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, and Injustice, the Story of the Holy Land Foundation. Right? Is this the two books that you wrote?
Yes.
Okay, Miko, our audience doesn't know you very well yet. And the reason I brought you is because I listened a lot to your speeches, to your stories. And we have a one side of information here in a Christian America about Zionism, about Palestinians being terrorists. And we need to listen to both sides of the story. We strive with Steve to tell the people the truth. So I have decided to bring you on, and I would like your side of the story. So would you please tell us, why did you write this book? What made you to write this book?
Well, thank you for having me. The motivation to write the book came from, encouragement really from friends, from other people who thought that the story that I was telling needed to be written. And the story has two parts. One is the general's son, so being the son of an Israeli general, and a general from the generation who were young officers in 1948 when Israel was established, and then generals in 1967 in the war of 1967 when Israel. So in the first war, Israel occupied most of Palestine. The second war, the job was completed and all of Palestine was taken. So that's the first part, growing up in a very Zionist, very patriotic family. And I have a president in my family, a president of the State of Israel, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, cabinet members, and so on and so forth. And then my second part of the story is my journey as an Israeli into Palestine, which forces a discussion on what is an Israeli and what is Palestine, where does Israel start in Palestine or end in Palestine begin, and so forth. And so that's basically the story. And my journey as an Israeli, as someone who grew up in a privileged sphere, in the sphere of the occupier, into the part of the country where the occupied, the oppressed live, the Palestinians, where, as you know, since you've been there, there's different amount. They receive different amounts of water, or they receive very little for infrastructure, potholes on the roads. There's, it's not safe, and so forth.
Miko,
So that's the journey between one side to the other.
About 2 years ago, I spoke to a Knesset member.
Yes, Yehuda Glick.
Glick. I interviewed Knesset member, and because of all these, controversy here in the United States, hearing that Israel is actually an apartheid state, I asked him this question. I said, "Are you an apartheid state? Do you have any laws that are against Palestinians that would consider you as an apartheid state?" And he told me that the only good thing in the Middle East that's happening right now is Israel, and he told me that there is absolutely no laws against Palestinians. Can you please make it clear, is this true? Did he speak truth?
The entire project of the State of Israel is an apartheid project. The very first laws that were passed when the State of Israel was established, defining the State of Israel, defining citizenship, defining land ownership, are all apartheid laws. These are laws that absolutely define the State of Israel as an apartheid state, because it gives rights to people like myself, Israeli Jews, at the expense of the indigenous population, who are the Palestinians. And so there is no way in which you can look at Israel and not see that it is an apartheid state. You can claim that it's not, but that would not be true. If you look at the state, if you look at the laws that were passed between the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 and today, dozens and dozens of laws, there can be absolutely no question that it's an apartheid state. And if there was any doubt, then recently the Knesset passed, the Knesset that's just about to end its tenure, session, it passed a law called the nation-state law, which not only defines Israel as an apartheid state, but has created a constitutional amendment that says it is, because it's a basic law. So it's like a constitutional amendment to the Israeli basic laws, which says that Israel is an apartheid state. So there's absolutely no question. It's not an apartheid state if you're a Jew. In other words, for Jewish people, it's a democracy. And if you've been there, you know, Jews live in a reality which is kind of a liberal democracy. But Jews make up less than half the population. The majority of the population are Palestinians, and they live under entirely different laws than the laws that govern me when I lived there or my family. Absolutely.
Miko, can you describe for people, especially in the case of Gaza right now, we've had the Great March of Return that they've been doing. It clearly started out as a peaceful demonstration, but we had Israeli snipers that have wounded and killed scores, unbelievable number of people thus far that are living in Gaza. And if you can describe a little bit about the conditions that they live under, because I know, if I'm not mistaken, you've actually been there before already, and at least you know the Palestinians that are living there. And we've covered this on multiple occasions, especially in light of the fact when the young woman that was a nurse who was wearing her white vest, she was shot and, in my opinion, was murdered. In fact, this was the same day that the IDF had put out an article that they knew they could account for every bullet, where those bullets went. And so when we covered it, I put out what they quoted. And of course, the same day after we covered this, they pulled that down because of the fact that she was killed in this particular attack that was going on. So if you could tell us about the living conditions that the Palestinians are suffering and what your thoughts are on their protest, and of course Israel's reaction to the protest.
If we're going to talk about Gaza, then we have to put things in perspective. The Gaza Strip is not a natural environment. It was something that was man-made. Somebody drew a line and said, okay, this is now the Gaza Strip. So we need to take a look. In the early 50s, late 40s, early 50s, when Israel was established, the ethnic cleansing campaign was massive. They needed a place in which to herd the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who were thrown out of their land and out of their homes. And so refugee camps were built around the city of Gaza and the southern part of the Mediterranean on the coast. A line was drawn called the Gaza Strip, and that was it. And that's how there was suddenly was the Gaza Strip. Now, these borders, by the way, were drawn mostly by Israelis. This was all made by Israelis. Now, over the last 7 decades, these refugees have been living there, seeing on the other side how Israel has taken their lands, taken their homes, taken their water, denied them of all rights. And today there are 2.2 million people living in the Gaza Strip, which can only be described as a massive concentration camp. They're denied access to water. 98% of the water in the Gaza Strip is not fit for human consumption. They're denied medical care. They're denied travel. They're denied anything that we would take for granted as a human right. And they've been fighting and protesting, throughout. I mean, which little means they have. There's never been a tank or a military force in Gaza, ever. And so I think that's important to remember. Now, the way Israel sees it, they're all terrorists because they want to go home. They're protesting for their rights. They want their rights. Their land are on the other side. Their homes are on the other side, and their rights are on the other side. And Israel is keeping them there in violation of international law and in violation of any humanitarian value that you could possibly imagine. The majority of the 2.2 million people who live in Gaza are actually refugees, and the descendants of refugees. Like I said, their homes are on the other side of the fence that Israel built. So it's not even a border; it's really a prison fence. And their protests are completely justifiable and completely justified. It's kind of ridiculous to say that they're unarmed because there's never been a military force in the Gaza Strip. There's never been a tank or warplane or any kind of. So, I mean, it's a joke to say, especially when they're faced with the Israeli army. And Israeli army executes them with snipers and has wounded. They've killed, a couple hundred. They've wounded thousands and thousands and thousands, badly wounded. They use the Gaza Strip as a laboratory for their weapons industry. So all kinds of terrible weapons, all kinds of terrible bullets that shatter joints and so forth. I think their first claim that they know exactly where every bullet lands is true. And I think one day that's going to be used in the International Criminal Court when these officers and military people are taken to the military court to pay for their crimes. But there's no question that if you believe in human rights, if you believe in justice, then you cannot call the people in Gaza terrorists because they're fighting for their rights. If you do not believe in those rights, then of course you can call them terrorists. It all depends on where your values are.
Silently removed her out of the list, and you can see that entire hot air balloon of accusations that Israel massacred innocent civilians is now no longer there. When schools and institutions were standing still for a whole minute for the victims of the Gaza massacre, what they didn't know is that they're standing still in memory of armed terrorists. That's what they did. Terrorists that were given instructions to go and kill Jewish people. They were given instructions by emails. They were given instructions by pamphlets, and they did what they were instructed to do. It's very interesting. The leader of the Hamas yesterday on a TV interview said that every single day they are closely communicating and coordinating with Tehran. They receive direction from Tehran, they receive funding from Tehran, and they receive instructions from Tehran. Their goal was that on May 14, 1948, all the TV screens around the world will be split. Half will show the opening of the embassy, and the other will show the riots on the fence. We also received indication the day before that Hamas is interested in very high number of casualties, so the screen will completely. So the screen will not only be split, but it will show that here people are getting killed, and here people are actually celebrating.
How far into this do you want me to listen?
That's good enough.
Good enough. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's so much of this I can take.
I know.
It's already on. It's already on.
So Miko, now that you listened to it, you see, this is what Christian Zionists and Christians in America are listening to, and especially when somebody from Israel, ex-IDF major, comes to United States among Christians. Of course, he says he believes Jesus Christ is his Messiah, but that he has inside information for Christians. And these kind of things are spread here. How would you react to this? What is your position on this?
So much
truth?
for Moses saying
Right.
to love your neighbor as yourself, right? That just goes completely out the window.
Well, what I want Miko's opinion on
Yes.
what happened in a Great March of Return. Did Israel kill innocent civilians, or were they all armed terrorists, as Amir Tsarfati is saying to Christians in America?
Israel has been murdering Palestinian civilians for 70 years now. So what's happened over the March of Return is not unique. Israel began attacking the Gaza Strip and claiming that they were terrorists in the 1950s. There was a special commando unit that was headed by Ariel Sharon when he was a young officer. It was a unit it was just murderers, cold-blooded murderers. They called them commandos. They would go into the Gaza Strip and commit terrible acts of terrible massacres. Now, there was never been a military force. There's never been a tank in the Gaza Strip. So the claim that somehow there's ever been a military threat from Gaza to Israel is insulting. It's a joke. So this was in the 50s. Then they went on the 60s. Then in the 70s, they went through the same thing. But then they stopped calling them. At first, they called them infiltrators because some Palestinians would try to come back to their homes. And much like the German occupiers of Poland, when they put the Jews in camps, there was the penalty for trying to escape was death. The same thing. Palestinians who tried to leave the Gaza Strip without a special permit are shot. This went on through the 50s and 60s and 70s. Then they stopped calling them infiltrators, they called them terrorists. And they stopped calling terrorists, they called them Hamas. Now they call them something else. The point is they've been massacring and killing. And then, of course, from 2008, they began carpet bombing Gaza and killing thousands at a time at each attack. And again, blaming the Palestinians, saying it's their fault because they're terrorists. So, people have a brain. You look at the conditions in the Gaza Strip, poor homeless refugees who have no access to weapons, much less an army, much less serious weapons, who have no access to clean water. A child in the Gaza Strip with an ear infection cannot get antibiotics, okay? So getting weapons to destroy Israel is probably not the first thing on their mind. Now, the reason this is the case is because Israel has imposed these rules. Israel has imposed this reality. It's not because there's no water in the country or there's no access to medical care. A child born a few miles away from the Gaza Strip in an Israeli settlement wouldn't dream of not getting antibiotics if they had an ear infection, So just imagine that as a parent. So, so the assumption, the claim that some of the Palestinians are the terrorists and the Israelis are the good guys, you'd have to be either blind or I don't know, looking at some other, looking the other way. One side has a massive army, one side has no army. One side has taken over the land, one side was kicked off the land. One side lives in complete luxury, like a Western country. The other side lives in misery like refugees. What more do we need to say? So these people who decided to march are now the terrorists, and they deserve to be shot and killed like this. And all this nonsense about Hamas or some Palestinians wanting to see bloodshed, wanting to see their own people die. I mean, at what level of despicable racism have they reached, these people? They can make these claims that people would want to see their own people shot like this by snipers. This was an absolute legitimate campaign. It still goes on, by the way, of resistance, of a desire to return. They are refugees. They want to go back to their homes, back to their lands, and to live as normal human beings do. And by the way, the end game here, the picture that everybody foresees, the vision that everybody is talking about, is a state that is with equality to all of its citizens, to Israelis and Palestinians. The only side that's talking about killing and murdering and secluding and locking up and segregating are the Israelis. So I don't know what to tell people who say this. I mean, some people say that this is God's will. If they believe in a God, that is that will of God. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I don't see any room here for conversation. But you look back at your values. Do you believe in the rights of people to live? Do you believe in them or not? And that's really the only factor that matters here.
Mm-hmm. Miko, I heard one of your speeches about 3 years ago, and that's when we thought that Hillary will make it as a president, and of course it didn't happen. Trump made it as president of the United States, and you said that Hillary will be maybe the last Zionist president. So what do you think of Trump?
Well, before you answer that, let me just tell you one thing. They asked us as a news agency to cover a Trump rally in the Orlando area about a year ago. So we went ahead and went. Roger Stone was the keynote speaker. Afterwards, Roger Stone had no idea what I really believed. He just knew Israeli News Live was the only invited news agency to the event. So when I met him, they introduced me to him privately, and he says to me with a big smile on his face, so no one else could really hear it though, he said, by the way, Stephen, he says, I'm a hardcore Zionist. He says, and so is President Trump.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
That didn't impress me, of course. So
But anyway, what do you think?
Well, what we saw in the last APAC convention, which just ended here in DC, is that for the first time, none of the Democratic candidates came to the APAC to speak at the APAC convention. And what I said was, I think that Hillary may well be, or the next president may well be, the last openly Zionist president. Now, the fact that none of them came to the APAC conference, I think, is incredibly telling. I think in the next cycle, in 4 years, it may be even different. I think even Republicans will be embarrassed to go to the APAC conference. And I think we're in the midst of a process that is inevitable, which is that the Palestinian voice is being heard, is that people all over the world, are sick and tired of the strength of the Israeli lobby. And by the way, you hear the same stories about the strength and the influence of the Israeli lobby, or the Israeli lobbies, I should say, whether you're here in the UK, in the Czech Republic, in Switzerland. I mean, I travel all over the world, and I hear the exact same story in every country, and people are sick of it. So politicians are learning that if they want to get the votes of their constituents, they're going to have to change their views. They're going to have to change their attitude towards Israel and towards the Palestinian issue. And it's taking too slow, of course, but there is progress. And I think the fact that so many candidates did not go, in other words, the entire Democratic field, nobody went to the APAC conference, is kind of validating what I said 4 years ago, which is this is the process that we're looking at right now.
Well, I sure hope that this comes true, because we are sick and tired of APEC controlling our foreign policy here in the United States. However, we just had an interview with our former
Congresswoman McKinney
of Georgia, Cynthia McKinney,
Yes.
and she said that APAC controls both sides, Democratic side and Republican side.
As far as the funding, she said your funding will be cut off. In fact, she talked about how that they have the bank, so to speak. They'll create your banks for you and help fund you. But the thing is
they influence both sides. There's no question. All issues of foreign policy, there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans in this country. So that's no surprise. But again, like I said, just the way the Democratic candidates decided not to go this year.
That's
which is a huge
very
step.
good.
That's actually very good.
Also, even when the Senate passed its S1, which included an anti-BDS component that wants to delegitimize the First Amendment right of people to boycott when it comes to Israel. Senator Van Hollen from Maryland, the junior senator from Maryland, gave an excellent speech where he talked about his unwavering support for Israel, but then stated that there was a red line, and how ridiculous it is to tell people that they don't have a right to boycott. And he showed how every single time this was brought to court, because so many states have passed these laws already, the courts threw them out. And so it's legal. It's clearly an unconstitutional thing. So now we have senators who are mainstream, who are supporters of Israel, drawing red lines, which I think, again, is enormous progress. We would not have heard a speech like that on the floor of the Senate, and it was a long 29-minute speech on the floor of the Senate. We would not have heard something like this 4 years ago.
Now, just one more question before we wrap it all up for today. But what do you think of this decision to give Golan to Israel? That President Trump just made this decision recently.
Well, there's two aspects to this. One is that legally it has no bearing. The Golan Heights are part of Syrian territory, and the Syrians that still live on the Golan Heights see themselves as citizens of Syria, and Donald Trump can't change that. The other aspect is it's the relation to Israeli politics. This was a gift. This was a campaign contribution from Donald Trump to Benjamin Netanyahu, because when Benjamin Netanyahu came back once again, he's showing the Israeli electorate what he can accomplish. This is one of those things that Israelis are dreaming of, to have the United States recognize the legitimacy of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and it's a prelude to the recognition, which I'm sure is coming very soon, of sovereignty over the West Bank, or what Israel calls Judea and Samaria. This, I'm sure, is coming. So this is kind of a prelude, and maybe in a way, an attempt to see how the world and people will react, and then to give them the big gift, which I'm sure they're going to get very soon again, is recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the entire West Bank.
Mm-hmm. Well, what is your vision for Israel and Israelis themselves? What is your vision for that country?
Well, I call the country Palestine because I believe that the name we use to call the country should be the name of the indigenous people call it, not the occupiers and the colonizers. So I choose to call it Palestine. The reality is that today in Palestine, there's some 6 million Israelis. And we are like the whites in South Africa. We're not organic. We're not from there. We have really very little connection to the land other than through, religious documents, but certainly very little history. We showed up and now we're there. So again, like the whites in South Africa, we are part of the landscape. I believe that the only solution and the inevitable solution is transforming Palestine from an apartheid state, which is what it is today, governed by this regime called Israel, this racist regime called Israel, into a real democracy with equal rights. And the way to do that is to impose boycott, divestment, and sanctions, is through BDS. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that anybody who has a conscience, anybody who cares for human rights should support the campaign, the BDS campaign, calling for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against the state of Israel, until, like in South Africa, the regime will collapse and be replaced by a democracy that respects the rights of all people.
When we lived in Israel, we kind of observed the situation ourselves, and we did notice that Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace, that it's more of a political issue than anything else, because they are very able to live with each other. So do you think that if Palestinians were given the right to return, do you think that that would pose a danger to Israelis in any way, or they could actually live in peace if there was a constitution similar to the United States with equal rights for all?
Well, I believe that when the Palestinian refugees return as they deserve to, then it will enrich the country, it will enrich the lives of all people who lives there, because living in a democracy with justice and equality is good for everyone. So I don't accept any claim that somehow paints a grim picture. I think that is going to be again. I think it's inevitable, but I think it's also going to benefit everyone who lives in Palestine, Israelis and Palestinians. Absolutely.
Miko, can you give us, again, the name of your book, any websites that our listeners can go to check on do you have any blogs or more books or resources?
Well, like you said, these are my two books.
Right.
The first one and the one we talked about the most really today is The General Son, The Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. It's available on Amazon. It's available online. This is the second edition already. And this book that only came out recently, Injustice. Where's the camera? Where am I going here?
You're doing good. No, that way.
More towards yourself.
More towards you. Yes, very good.
And that is Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. The Holy Land Foundation was a Muslim charity that was closed down on terrorism charges that were trumped up, and 5 very good men are sitting in federal prison today, and they are absolutely innocent. It was an enormous amount of work to put this book together. I read many thousands of court transcripts and legal documents and so forth. And if anybody wants to find me, I'm available on social media. I'm on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. I have a blog, MikoPeled.com. Like I said, I travel and speak everywhere. I write regularly for Mint Press. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm available.
Yes, Miko, one of the very first speeches that I heard, you were talking about how you were in IDF and you were educated to hate your enemy, which were very close by, several miles away from you. But then when you came to the United States, you and Palestinians were good friends. So you were wondering how you can be such a good friends in America, but you are enemies in Israel. And I think that was what kind of caught my attention, because true, right? I mean, you were taught that they're your enemies in the state of Israel, but as soon as you are in the United States, you were perfectly equal and you were friends.
Well, when you have a system that allows for equal rights, then there's no reason to fight.
Right.
When you live in a system when you're the oppressor, then there's no reason for anybody to like each other or not fight. You start fighting like the great Palestinian writer Hassan Kanafani said, you start fighting for a reason and then you stop fighting for a reason. When you have injustice, then resistance is what's called for. When you don't have injustice, when you live in a reality where there is no injustice, then it's very easy to live together in peace. That's the component. The reason Israelis and Palestinians live in the reality they live in today is because Israel has imposed an unjust system. Once that unjust system is removed and the privileges that I have are shared with everyone who lives there, regardless of whether they're Israeli or Palestinian, then there's no more reason for the friction, for the hatred.
That's right. That's right. And Miko, you also write about tragedy that happened in your family. Your 13-year-old niece died in Israel in a suicide bomber attack, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Your sister, does she feel resentment toward Palestinians because that happened?
Well, I talk about this in the book, in The General Son. After my niece was killed, of course, there's always talk about revenge and retaliation. And my sister stood up right away and said, "Don't talk to me about killing more people." She said, "No real mother would want to see this happen to any other mother." That was her statement. And today she's almost as vocal, if not more, than I am on the issue of justice for Palestinian, and she wrote an incredibly important book about the racism in the Israeli education system. It's called Palestine in Israeli Textbooks and Israeli School Books, and I strongly recommend your listeners to go and check it out.
Yes.
Yes, can you please again tell the name of your sister as an author and the name of the book slowly?
Let me see, I might have a copy of the book right here. That's not nearby. Her name is Nurit Peled El-Hanan. And the book is called Palestine in Israeli School Books.
We'll post it on the screen for our viewers so they can see it, as well as a link on how to get both Miko Peled
Because
and
Miko, what we
book.
hear on this side of the world, especially Christian side, is that Palestinians and Arabs are teaching their children to kill the Jewish.
This is the book.
Oh wow! Palestine in Israeli School Books, Ideology, Propaganda in Education, Nurit Peled El-Hanan. Very nice. Thank you, Miko, because I think it's
she's a professor at the Hebrew University. She teaches, she's an educator.
Wow, amazing lady.
Would she be willing to come on with us?
Would she be? Yeah, that would be interesting.
You can try. You send her a message on Facebook like you did with me. It's very easy.
Okay.
And she does interviews all the time.
Okay.
She's very, very, very active, very, very vocal. And so, yeah, she's quite the expert. And she has a Palestinian expert friend who's an expert on the Palestinian school books, and they both do things together. It's very interesting.
Yeah, because, Miko, what we hear on our side, Christian side over here, is that Arabs are teaching their children in schools to kill Israelis. That's always mentioned. But nobody is saying the side of the story of your sister, how Israelis are teaching their children to...
Yeah, well, that's the truth. The truth of the matter is that the Palestinian textbooks go through a great deal of scrutiny and censorship, so they couldn't teach this stuff even if they wanted to, because the Europeans and the Israelis and others are all their textbooks go through a lot of scrutiny, a lot of censorship. So they can't just put anything in there and then teach it, because it gets censored anyway. Israeli school books don't go through that kind of scrutiny. And so their textbooks are, the entire education system is inherently racist, and the textbooks reflect that, as she shows in this book.
Amazing.
That
yes.
is
We'll have to look,
amazing.
and we'll get the book as well.
Yeah,
so.
we'll get the book and your book as well. So anyway,
yes,
go
it's
ahead,
been
Steve.
really a blessing to have you on, Miko. And
Yes.
thank you for joining us here today. We know your time is valuable and short there. And I think for our listeners as well, this should start opening up eyes. And by the way, Israeli News Live is far more diversified today than what we were, say, 3-4 years ago.
Right.
We have a huge Arabic community now as well. Of course, we do have Christians. We have many Israeli Jews that watch the broadcast as well, and of course, people from all over the world. And so that's what's really important. And of course, our desire is to see, like the message that you have as well, Miko, to better educate, especially in the case of America or even Europe or other nations, so that the people that are listening can reach out to those people that are in government, in Congress, in Senate, etc. And we have congressmen, senators from all over the world that come on here as well. But to speak to them about what's really happening and lift the veil, so to speak, on all the propaganda that's going out, because we have a massive amount of propaganda
Yes.
that is happening here in America, and the laws that are being passed continually in the United States, and now all 50 states on board after Trump has come into office. And it's only going to get worse, and they're about to silence Americans to where we can't even get the truth out. It's going to be more like what it is in Israel, where the Palestinians are censored. We're being censored as well, and our First Amendment rights are going to go by the wayside unless people stand up and do something now.
Yes, and thank you, Miko, for coming out
Sure.
with us.
My pleasure. Thank you
And we
both.
hope that you will still come on with us later.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shalom, shalom. Thank you for watching. I'm Steve Ben-Nun with Yana Ben-Nun and Miko Peled here on Israeli News Live. Shalom.